This is the new Suzuki Intruder 150 that is going on sale in India shortly. Suzuki plans to sell it first in the big towns and then move on to the smaller towns. It's a very simple motorcycle in idea because in concept it runs the same powertrain as the Gixxer, which is not a bad thing because it's a good powertrain, it's a proven powertrain, it's a powertrain we've all come to like. Just for the record, the Gixxer is currently Overdrive's favorite 150. They do have some small changes though. The airbox is bigger, the exhaust has been retuned, and Suzuki says while the peak power and peak torque don't really change from the Gixxer, the idea is the tuning offsets the 8 kilos of weight that the bike has gained in the transition from being a Gixxer to being an Intruder. A lot of that weight comes from the frame because at the back of the frame there's a longer swing arm, the pivot point has been moved, and there's a little bit of extra reinforcement for the length and the weight, and that's roughly where the 8 kilos come from. Of course, the plastics and all also add up. Just like the Gixxer SF ABS, this also has front ABS, but otherwise the specification, tires, everything remains the same. At the front suspension is very similar to the Gixxer suspension. The state of tune has changed, it's a different setting. At the back the shock is new, it's a slightly shorter shock, but when you ride it the first impression you get is of the Gixxer because it's very similar in the way it turns, in the way it handles bumps, and it's actually quite good at both of these things. What it can't really do obviously is very fast direction changes, which again a long format like this finds it harder to do. It's a small bike, it's not really that hard. And the other thing it can't do is handle big bumps, which again a format like this anyway finds hard to do. In terms of aggregates, it uses the same meter set as the Gixxer, so that's the all digital unit down to the shift light. It's kind of odd on a cruiser, but well, it's useful. It is a densely packed instrument cluster, but it's very easy to get used to knowing exactly what you're looking for, so you won't get confused between the clock and the trip meter and the gear indicator and all of those things. It's also got all the features in it. All the other aggregates more or less are different, so there is new foot pegs front and rear. The brake pedal is very similar in construction, in nature to the Gixxer, but obviously it's a completely new unit. There's a little subframe there which is part of the 8 kilos that the bike has gained, and that's perhaps one of the places where there's chrome, which is like a toe guard well, it protects your ankle and heel and everything from going into the motorcycle. In terms of styling, I'm a little bit confused by this motorcycle because if you step back and you look at the rear end of the motorcycle, it actually reminds you strongly of a scooter, as does the instrument console because of this plastic that comes out of the motorcycle and looks at you like this. But when you sit on it and look at it, it's not so bad. But when you go to the front and look, it's definitely a motorcycle because there's a lot of sculpting on that panel which is invisible to the rider as you sit. On this particular motorcycle, those mirrors are optional. They're a 1,000 rupee accessory. I would recommend you don't upgrade to them because they're not the ball adjustment type, so they're harder to work with. Suzuki still hasn't gone on LED on the Intruder, so you still get bulbs in the indicators. There is an actual headlight bulb, although the DRL is an LED. But basically, the story of the Intruder comes down to its styling and whether you can digest it or not. It does look like a very large motorcycle when you ride it, maybe sitting on skinny tires, but effect of a big motorcycle definitely there. In big urban where we know what good cruisers look like, this may not go down too well, but I think in small towns and the rest of India where the idea of a cruiser is not that well established, this might actually work. This is just a quick first impression of what the Suzuki Intruder 150 feels like. Watch out for more stories in Overdrive, including the road test and, when the time comes, a comparison test with the obvious contender, the Bajaj Avenger 150. Overall, nice motorcycle. The styling is a little hard to digest, the pricing is right, the spec is right, the equipment is right, and it feels good to ride. So in a sense, the question really is, can you live with what this looks like?